Greetings, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. It's wonderful you can join us again. I'm just going to wait for 30 seconds or so. We had a huge response to this, so 680 something, I think, have registered. So we'll just wait a little bit and then we'll kick it off. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, wherever you are in the world. It's wonderful you could join us for our annual Destination Stewardship Edition, part of our State of the American Traveller quarterly series that we've been running for many years. This is a special deep dive with our wonderful friends at Future Partners, and we're looking at Destination Stewardship. It was formerly called Destination Management and Sustainable Travel, but we've embraced the more proactive, broader concept of stewardship, which is the role and responsibility of destination organizations and their tourism partners to ensure that tourism is working not just economically or for businesses, but very importantly for the community and the natural environment. So today I'm really honored to be joined by an all-star panel. And our first, let me introduce our very good friend and colleague, Erin Francis Cummings, President and CEO of Future Partners. Erin's joining us from San Francisco and their offices. In fact, all of us are in our offices today. And Erin's going to be presenting the hot off the press research as to how US travelers think about the concepts of stewardship and sustainability and tourism in their community. We're also delighted to be joined by Matt Curtis, a new friend, but with a wonderful track record in the private and public sector. He's worked for HomeAway, Expedia Group. He's worked in the mayor's office of Austin, so he brings a deep experience in the public and private sector of all sorts of public policy issues, but particularly around short-term rentals. And he's going to be speaking as part of our short-term rental panel with Lucy Kay, very familiar, I'm sure, to many of you, President and CEO of the Breckenridge Tourism Office, a real leader on community engagement, and recently has been involved in updating their short-term rental policy. And Lucy's going to be sharing the practical sort of insights from that experience and what it means for destinations all around North America and around the world. So I'll pass over to Erin here in a moment. At Miles and with our partners at Coraggio Group, we've been doing a lot of research and consultation around the principles of stewardship. This has been led by Kristen Dunn, who actually spoke at Destinations International's annual convention on this topic. And with a group of us and in consultation with a huge range of partners and experts across the industry, we've developed this white paper sort of reframing the concept of stewardship and what it means for destinations and tourism. So we'll be sharing this link and all the slides and the webinar recording and other resources out to you via an email. Plus, you'll be able to go online and access the information both at Miles Partnership and Future Partners. This, of course, is part of our quarterly deep dive series where we look at different themes and topics. So we're going to be, first of all, passing over to Erin, who's going to share the latest traveller sentiment, how US leisure travellers are thinking about travel. But then she's going to spend the bulk of the time on the concepts of stewardship and sustainability in three major parts: how US travellers think about the environment, climate change, and tourism in their community. Then we'll dive into a discussion on short-term rentals with Matt and Lucy. I've got some insights from a major study that we've helped lead on community engagement. One part of that was short-term rentals, Time for Democracy, hopefully very familiar to many of you. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Erin. for the latest insights on how US travelers think about sustainability and stewardship. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you so much, Chris. And if you've just joined us, I want to echo Chris's sentiments. Thank you for being here. Again, I'm Erin Francis Cummings, President and CEO of Future Partners, a company formerly known as Destination Analysts. And we are a creative insights firm shaping winning strategies for travel, tourism, and hospitality leaders that capture hearts, minds, and market share. It's my great pleasure to present the 2023 Destination Stewardship edition of the State of the American Traveler Study, our ongoing research that looks into how Americans are considering, experiencing, and consuming travel, which has been conducted since 2006. These quarterly deep dives we do with our dear friends at Miles allow the industry to get a fuller, richer understanding of the most critical topics in travel and tourism. So let's take you into the latest findings on the significant issues influencing and impacting how travel industry professionals can be stewards of their destinations. In terms of our methodology, the State of the American Traveler Study is based on a monthly tracking survey that collects a minimum of 4,000 unique completed responses from a nationally representative sample of American travelers. After the data is collected, it's weighted by geography and demographics, so it's reflective of the actual American traveling population. And today's findings represent data collected just a few weeks ago in October and have a confidence interval of plus or minus 1.6%. Before we explore the latest consumer opinions and behaviors impacting destination stewardship, it's very important to first take a macro view to provide context to the greater reality that traveling consumers are in. So I'm going to begin with a top-level look at some of the latest trends in American travel sentiment and behaviors and what this means for the months ahead. So the most anticipated recession in history still looms. More than half, 52% of American travelers say they expect the US to enter an economic recession within the next 6 months. Although this remains down from the peak seen last year, it nevertheless is a sentiment that is fairly widespread. And unfortunately, this recession anxiety is causing traveling consumers to be more spend cautious. 63% of American travelers say that right now they're being more careful with their money, specifically because they are concerned about an upcoming recession. And as you can see on this time series chart going back a year, the spending caution has been persistent. American travelers do report an annual leisure travel budget of $3,785. However, this amount remains stubbornly below averages that we saw last year and February's peak of $4,677. And indeed, the top deterrents to travel in the last months are all financial related, with travel being too expensive and personal financial reasons deterring nearly 40% of Americans from traveling in the past 6 months. And except for the cost of gas falling, the level that Americans are being deterred to travel by financial reasons has largely remained unchanged over the last 18 months. However, fully 1/3 of American travelers now say that the present time is a good or very good time to spend their money on travel. And this represents a peak in this metric for 2023, meaning this is the best Americans have felt about spending money on travel all year. In fact, more than half of American travelers, 54%, say leisure travel spending will be a high priority for them in how they spend their money in the next 3 months. And if we look at the prioritization of travel in Americans' budgets over time, travel as a budget priority has recovered after reaching lows that we saw this past summer. For the entire 17 years of this study, we have asked Americans if they expect to travel more or less for leisure than they did in the most recent 12-month period. Currently, 31% of American travelers expect their leisure trip volume to increase in the next year. And looking over time, we see that optimism for increased trip volume is at a high for this year. And for the last 17 years, we've also asked in the next 12 months, do you expect to spend more or less for leisure travel than you did in the most recent 12-month period? 33% of American travelers currently expect their leisure travel spending to increase over the next year. And looking at this metric over the last years, we see that expectations for increased travel spending has rebounded again after hitting some lows this summer. Americans' enthusiasm for travel is high. In fact, it's measuring 8.1 on a scale of 0 to 10. 88% of American travelers report they will travel for leisure in the next 12 months, taking 3.5 trips on average. That's almost 1 a quarter. And travel rates have remained steadily high, and expected leisure trip volume is actually at a 3-year high level. So in summary, while over half of American travelers still see a recession looming and high costs remain the top deterrent to travel, rising numbers of Americans feel the present is a good time to spend on travel. They're making travel spending a budget priority and expect to increase their travel volume and trip spending in the next 12 months. So with that context, let's get into the exploration of the critical topics impacting destination stewardship. I'll cover findings related to environmental concerns, climate change, and community sentiment, starting with environmental concerns. 1 in 5 American travelers now feels that travel has an overall negative impact on the environment. 65% say no, it doesn't, and 15% are unsure. However, interestingly, fewer Americans overall feel this way compared to last year, or actually the last 2 years, when 23 and 24% of travelers said this. The sentiment is elevated from 2019, though, when just 17% said travel has an overall negative impact on the environment. We ask, when traveling, what aspects of your environmental and community impact do you typically think about? We found that this year, most Americans, 74%, still consider the environmental and community impacts their travel has. In terms of the specific aspects they think about, plastic waste they create is top at 35%. Crowding and congestion in the communities they visit and increasing traffic or parking issues in destinations where they drive, those come in second and third. More than 1 in 5 cite impacts on natural ecosystems, including wildlife, water consumption, and energy consumption, especially from fossil fuels. And 18% report they typically think about carbon emissions from their travel contributing to global warming. Our biggest and next generation of travelers are the ones that are most sensitive to and thinking of their environmental impacts. Gen Z and millennials are represented by the darker green on the charts that you're seeing right now, compared to Gen X and baby boomer travelers. As you can see, our younger travelers consider their energy consumption, how they're increasing costs for residents in the communities that they visit, and changing the character of the neighborhoods they visit by being a tourist there at far greater rates than older travelers are. Survey respondents were presented this information. A carbon offset in travel is a payment made to offset or compensate for the emissions of greenhouse gases created by your trip, for example, from your air travel. Carbon offsets might restore forests or wetlands or expand renewable energy. And then the response to the question that we followed up on this shows that Americans purchasing carbon offsets for their travel is on the rise at 10%, and that is up from 7% last year. And this is particularly so among our millennial generation age travelers, 21% of whom report purchasing a carbon offset for their travel in the last year, and that's up from 13% in 2022. Survey respondents were then presented this information. Many hotels now have green programs and certifications that show their commitment to reducing their environmental impact, for example, recycling, water conservation, energy efficiency, use of renewable energy, etc. And then they were asked, when traveling, do you make it a priority to stay in hotels that have green programs and certifications? We see that Americans are also increasingly prioritizing stays in hotels with green initiatives, now at 32%, up 3 points from last year. Again, this is particularly true of millennial age travelers, 45% of whom say they are prioritizing green programs in their hotel selection. We also asked, how often would you pay slightly more? For example, 10% max, for staying at a hotel that has a strong green program or certification. Willingness to pay slightly more to stay in hotels with strong green programs is on the rise too, with 35% of American travelers saying they are always or sometimes willing to pay more for a hotel with a strong green program. And that's up 4 points from 2022. 48%, nearly half of millennial age travelers, 36% of Gen Z travelers, and 31% of Gen X travelers are willing to pay more for this. Who else is willing to pay more for hotels with strong green programs or certifications? 52% of business travelers and 55% of conventioneers are. Nearly half, 49% of those who are parents of school-age children right now and who travel with those children are also. We presented this statement. I believe that people generally should not travel long distances via air as it is bad for the environment, and then asked American travelers to rate their level of agreement with that statement. The belief that people should refrain from traveling long distances via air is still not widespread, as only 14% agree or strongly agree with that statement. This is up 1 point from 2022, but actually down 2 points from 2019 when 16% felt this way. However, I want you to note that a notable 1 in 5 Gen Z travelers and nearly a quarter of millennial travelers do believe people should refrain from traveling long distances via air because of a negative impact on the environment. So it's nevertheless something that cannot be ignored. So in summary, consideration of the environment when traveling is on the rise, and higher income travelers, business travelers, convention goers, and millennials are increasingly willing to pay more for carbon offsets and hotels with strong green initiatives. The next destination stewardship related topic that I will cover today is American travelers' perspectives on climate change. Americans were asked whether they believe that human activity is responsible for climate change. Currently, 62% of American travelers believe that human activity is responsible for climate change. 23% say no, and 15% are unsure. If we look back over the last several years, the belief that human activity is responsible for climate change has fluctuated somewhat year to year, with 2023 marking a relative low and 2022 marking a relative high. If we look more deeply at who is in the yes category, as you can see on this chart on the right, we find that those in higher income households are likelier to agree that human activity is responsible for climate change. And on climate change issues, we asked, in the past 12 months, have you decided to not visit a specific destination due to concerns about weather-related problems such as excessive heat, hurricanes, and wildfires? And nearly a quarter, 24% of American travelers say extreme weather impacted their destination decision in this past year. 30% of millennials actually report this, and that is 10 points higher than Gen X and baby boomer travelers. We also ask American travelers to think about in the past 5 years and then the next 5 years, and then to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how much they think climate change has or will impact their leisure travel. The mean impact on this 10-point scale is shown for this, and the last year on the left is how Americans rated the impact of climate change on their travel in the past 5 years. We see the percent rating a significant level of impact has grown 2 points in the last year, and the mean has grown from 2.8 to 4.3. How Americans perceive the next 5 years is on the right, and we see that Americans continue to anticipate further impact of climate change as they look forward. 20% say that it will have a significant level of impact, and that's up 4 points in the last year. And the mean impact is up to 4.8 from 4.5. We ask American travelers more specifically about the ways they anticipate concern about climate change and how it will impact their travel in the next few years. More Americans overall anticipate climate change will cause them to adjust their travel habits at 59%, up 3 points since last year. The top anticipated travel behavioral adjustments is traveling more to destinations that are closer to home and traveling less often overall. 17% say they will stay home and explore their own destination. 15% say they will change how they travel once they arrive in their destination, for instance, taking more public transportation. 15% also say they will travel less often to distant destinations on long flights. 14% say they will change the costs associated with their travel, like buying carbon offsets, and 13% say they will stay longer if they travel to distant destinations. Looking specifically at that top behavioral change, traveling closer to home. Compared to 2022, more Americans now plan to travel to destinations closer to home as a result of climate change. Again, that is up 6 points in the last year. This is particularly a particular consideration amongst those living in urban areas. So that is now 10 points higher among people living in urban areas compared to those that live in rural areas, feeling that they will make those adjustments. So in summary, Americans are increasingly feeling that climate change has and will impact their leisure travel. More now say they plan to travel closer to home as a result, particularly travelers who live in urban areas. So finally, let's take a look at community sentiment, how Americans feel about tourism's impact on their quality of life. We ask agreement with the statement, I live in a community that is a popular tourism destination. Those who consider their home community to be a popular tourism destination has been declining. It's now at 43%, and that's down 2 points from 2022 and down 4 points since 2021. Looking regionally, residents of the American West and South are likely to say that they live in popular tourism destinations. 54% of those residing in the West say they live in a popular tourism destination, and 47% of those in the South say that. In comparison, just 38% of those in the Northeast feel that way, and 26% in the Midwest. The belief that tourism improves communities is at an all-time high. 46% of American travelers agree or strongly agree with the statement, I believe tourism in my community makes it a better place in which to live. And this represents a 9-point increase from 2022 and a 7-point increase from 2021. Looking more deeply at the belief that tourism makes a community a better place to live, while those in the West and South have the strongest agreement that tourism improves communities, still about 40% of residents in the Northeast and the Midwest also share that sentiment. And those in higher income households are also likelier to agree with tourism's positive impact on communities. More Americans now also consider the tourism industry to be important to the vitality of their community. When asked for their opinion on how important the tourism industry is to the economic vitality of the community in which they live, 55% of American travelers said it was important or very important, up 3 points from the last 2 years. Again, looking more specifically at this sentiment, it's greatest in the West and the Southern US, but perhaps a more important finding for the industry is this one. While far fewer Midwesterners consider their communities to be popular tourism destinations, nearly twice as many still consider the tourism industry to be important to their community's economic vitality. So our survey respondents were asked to think about their community's tourism industry and its impact on their community, and then rate how much they agree with several statements that we then presented to them. So I'm going to walk you through the level of agreement with each of these statements now. Tourism helps to support local businesses. 68% agree with that, only 10% disagree. Visitor spending generates funding for community services. 59% of Americans agree with that, just 12% disagree. Tourism supports events in my local area that I enjoy as a resident. 55% agree, only 14% disagree. Tourists are respectful of my local community. 45% agree, not a majority, but only 15% disagree with that. Now on to more negative leaning statements. Tourists bring crowds, congestion, and traffic to my community. 40% agree with this sentiment, comparable to the percent who say they live in popular tourism areas. However, 28% disagree with this. Another negative leaning statement. Tourism negatively impacts our community's natural areas like parks, trails, natural reserves, etc. 47% disagree with that statement. 23% agree with it. Tourists make my community less safe. 49% disagree with that, and just 20% agree. There are too many tourists in my local community. 54% disagree with that sentiment. Just 19% agree with it. And finally, I am worried about the impact tourism has on our community culture. 52% disagree with that, just 18% agree. So this chart considers all of those statements together. We see that the most agreement among Americans is with those statements that express positive feelings towards tourism. And the negative leaning ones are on the bottom, save for tourists bringing crowds, congestion, and traffic. Now let's look at the concept of over-tourism. Far fewer Americans currently feel they live in a place that has an over-tourism issue compared to the peak we saw in 2021. It's now at 20%, which is up 2 points from 2022, but 8 points lower than in 2021. Looking deeper into this, agreement that their community has an issue with over-tourism is strongest amongst those living in urban areas, but it grew the most among people who live in rural areas. So that in rural areas, it's up 3 points to now 15%. Among those who feel they live in a community with an over-tourism problem, it's important to know that if they feel that way, it's likely they perceive that as a serious issue. 48% say it's a serious or extremely serious problem to them. And the sentiment that over-tourism is a serious issue is strongest amongst those residing in urban areas and also rural areas. Perceptions of over-tourism will deter Americans from actually visiting a destination, as we suspected. That's a sentiment that's held steady over the last year, although it is down from 2021. 52% of American travelers say that if a U.S. destination has a problem with over-tourism, they are less likely to visit it. And finally, awareness of their local official destination marketing organization is on the rise. We asked, does your community have an official destination tourism organization, i.e. one that promotes and helps manage travel to your community, like an official visitor's office, Convention and Visitors Bureau, or Chamber of Commerce? In 2022, 31% of American travelers said yes. In 2023, 40% said yes. Up 9 points, and uncertainty has declined 5 points, and the no response has declined 4 points. So in summary for you today on destination stewardship and the latest findings into American traveling consumers' perceptions and feelings around this, concerns about the environmental impact of travel is on the rise, and higher income travelers, business travelers, convention goers, and millennial age travelers are increasingly willing to pay more for things like carbon offsets and hotels with strong green initiatives. Americans increasingly feel that climate change has and will impact their leisure travel. More now say they plan to travel closer to home as a result. And Americans feel the benefits of tourism outweigh the issues. But a majority will say they will avoid destinations that suffer from perceived over-tourism, which does present an opportunity for dispersion to less touristed or trafficked areas. I want to thank you so much for joining me on this current look at the topics influencing and impacting destination stewardship. I hope this information is helpful to your planning and your overall understanding of your customers and stakeholders. The State of the American Traveler is, of course, a treasure trove of information. So if I can provide you more, please feel welcome to reach out. And for the upcoming really important conversation that Chris will lead with Matt and Lucy on short-term rentals, I did pull for you all a profile of short-term rental users from our latest State of the American Traveler. And here are some important insights about these travelers. In the past 2 years, 22% of American travelers have stayed in lodging booked through Airbnb or VRBO, and 18% say they have stayed in other vacation home rentals. 18% of American travelers have stayed in a short-term rental in the past month alone. Short-term rental users are more experienced, frequent, and active travelers. Short-term rental users have higher annual travel budgets than other travelers. They're at $4,392, that is $600 more than other travelers. They also have longer trip planning windows, 7.6 weeks, that's a week longer than other American travelers. They're likelier to be motivated by exploration and enjoying nature and the greater outdoors. Interestingly, safety concerns are a greater deterrent to travel for them compared to other travelers. They are highly active travel dreamers and planners. 98% have done some travel inspiration seeking and planning in the last week alone, including 50% who research travel ideas online. And they're more video and social forward than traditional digital in what they are seeking. So finally, I wanted to make sure you knew that we have plenty of research to drive your strategy. There are tons of reports available to you right now. I threw up that QR code in case you need to look at some reports, and that will take you to our list of those right now. Thank you again so much. And Chris, I will hand it over to you for this really important discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Erin. Just one quick question. We were asked, when were you collecting the data in the field? Was this October?
Correct. The last week and a half of October or so.
Okay, so it was after the current war in the Middle East was underway. Okay, and just a reminder, all of those stats provide a fantastic opportunity to sort of benchmark your own resident sentiment research against, you know, what your own community thinks about these critical issues. So I'm going to invite back Matt and Lucy, and we're going to dive into the timely, topical, and somewhat controversial topic of short-term rentals, which is, of course, a critical part of how tourism is perceived by some in the community and by the tourism sector, particularly, obviously, hoteliers. And again, a reminder that Matt Curtis with Smart City Policy Group brings that public and private sector expertise, and we've got a leading destination organization leader, Lucy Kay, to join us. Just a couple of setup remarks to add to what Erin shared. So you could see in that research that around 1 in 5 Americans report just in the last month having used short-term rentals. If you actually look at their total share of room nights, it's now approaching the pre-pandemic high. You can see it's at around 14%. This is data from our very good friends at AirDNA, who were part of, along with a whole range of other research and data providers, part of Time for Democracy, which was a big European and North American study on community engagement. And we looked at short-term rentals as part of that. AirDNA also gave us up-to-date stats on how different destinations are trending versus 2019, which is on the left, and up to about August 2023 on the right. And if we actually have a look at the next slide where I've added the baseline, you can see that, in fact, large cities have not recovered to 2019 levels, and they really are unlikely to recover given some of the dramatic changes that are going on now, particularly in major cities, but also other destinations. So New York City, for example, and British Columbia, just in the last month or two, have introduced far tighter restrictions on short-term rentals, and in some case, really largely eliminated them as a vacation rental and visitor accommodation option. So in Time for Democracy, And thank you to Breckenridge and the 42 other destinations across North America and Europe who helped make that major study possible. We had a whole section on short-term rentals. You can actually, we'll be sharing that report and case studies from around the world as one of the resources that we'll share after the webinar today. But we identified 8 best practices for destination organizations in the tourism industry. Matt and Lucy will be illustrating some of these, but you can see it's all about the opportunity for destination organizations to either get engaged or to get re-engaged in the discussion and debate about short-term rentals in your community, to make sure that there's a smart, thoughtful balance between the needs of different stakeholder groups, and that you can incorporate some of these best practices, such as taking advantage of research and data that really gives you a tremendously powerful and insightful picture on what's going on with regards to short-term rentals, customizing your short-term rental management regime by neighborhood, by area, by type of accommodation. Not a one-size-fits-all works best. Challenge the industry, the host, to self-regulate using tactics such as good neighbor policies. Galveston's got a very successful example of that. Make sure you've got an inclusive registration system that is also used by the major platforms. So if I want to list my property, I've got to be registered with the local city council or other authority. And then, of course, this can generate revenue that can be used both for destination marketing and management purposes, but potentially also part of a solution, a private-public solution to the vexing and challenging issue of housing access and affordability. So we'll be touching on a number of these. I've also written a blog which summarizes these, plus brings people up to date with some of the latest news on what's happening with short-term rentals around the world. And so please access that. And with no further ado, I'm first going to pass over to Matt for some opening remarks, and then we'll hear from Lucy. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
It's great to see you, and that was a great discussion with Aaron. A really thoughtful presentation, a lot of great data there, so really neat stuff. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about short-term rentals. My name is Matt Curtis. I've been working in this space for almost 12 years now. I first started doing a little bit of consulting on the issue, and then I started working on this in 2011. I was the first head of global government affairs for HomeAway, which was later acquired by Expedia, and I became the head of global government affairs for Expedia. And I started on the same day, at the same time, as the first head of global government affairs for Airbnb. But I stayed with the role for a long period of time, and then now consult for about the last 6 years or so. I've been consulting on this issue, working with a variety of other former policymakers, helping local governments and DMOs figure the short-term rental space out. We do a lot of work throughout the nation, but occasionally even some international work, which is fun. So let's talk a little bit about this. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide. I'm going to speak about a few different items, but I might interject a few thoughts as you go through this quick talk with some of the things we just heard and some of the best practices that Chris just shared. So one of them is related to knowing the sector. There are different types of short-term rentals. Now, we all know what we think of as a short-term rental in our community, whether we're in a beach vacation town or mountain vacation town. But what about big cities? What about mid-tier towns where sometimes the travel might be business related? It might be kind of more of something that's replacing the old model of corporate hotels. Well, let's take a look at this. This is single-family homes, and we've got several different categories here. And basically what you look at is, from the left, the red hosted primary single-family home, the model that we originally thought of as the original Airbnb model. Now, of course, that has evolved consistently, but the idea is the host is present in the property, all the way down to the professionally managed property. And that might be something that we're more used to, especially in vacation destinations. Sometimes we've even seen some professional vacation companies that have been multi-generational. They've been handed down from a grandparent or a parent to younger folks. And so having those professional managers there is helpful. Well, over the years, we've done different surveys and studies working with DMOs and cities, sometimes boards of realtors or vacation rental management companies. And this is what we found is oftentimes the challenge is that that primary model is somebody who might only be renting 15, 20 days a year, 30 days a year, maybe at the most. And some cities capped the total limit at 45 or 60 or 90 days for people to rent under that model, but maybe far less compliant. And all the studies and surveys that we've found and that we've conducted, we found the highest rate of compliance with the professionally managed properties. The challenge, however, is how do you balance that in your community when so many people might be talking about impacts on housing or concern for community culture? And that's something going back to what Aaron had mentioned, that the concern for community culture did not come through with the surveys that we were just talking about just moments ago. However, when you're down at City Hall talking about short-term rentals, concern for community culture is almost all you'll hear. That's why one of the things you want to do is to make sure to separate the anecdote from the data and really try to work to capture more data. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. This is more multifamily properties. Oftentimes this might be, like I said, in a big city or a mid-tier city where the model is replacing the old corporate apartment model, but maybe also in your beach or mountain town where, again, you have multifamily properties. The hosted model, plenty of great hosts out there that do their best to be compliant and create a safe stay. But more often than not, people who are casually approaching this, they aren't thinking about tax remittance. They aren't thinking about any kind of a need to get registered or follow a registration scheme, all the way down to the professionally managed model, much more compliant. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next model, next slide. One of the things that we've seen that helps DMOs around the United States and even around the world is this new model of a software compliance tool. I'm a big fan of this. Now, there's some companies that kind of question some of their tactics. I do think it's important when you're investing in a software compliance tool to ask some probing questions about who they may have partnerships or allegiances with, because there are some that are allied with the OTAs, the online travel agencies. And if they're meant to enforce compliance against those, does that not create a conflict? And then there's just a couple that I really like. The ones that I really like tend to hit about a 98 or 99% compliance rate. Now, for our DMO friends, oftentimes city or county code enforcement directors will talk about compliance being the biggest challenge. A reasonable investment in a software compliance tool can help achieve that. They also do some neat things as far as educating all of the properties in their area, creating the tax portal so that you can gain that necessary taxes that you deserve. Now, a lot of folks like talking about creating a voluntary collection agreement with one or two of the larger OTAs. But what we're seeing over time is the trend line of booking through the OTAs is going down. More people are booking direct more often, so directly with the host or the professional property manager, with the rent by owner, or they might be going to microsites. Now, remember, there's a couple large OTAs out there that don't do the voluntary collection agreement with cities. So you have two of the large OTAs don't do voluntary collection agreements with the OTAs, a large number of increasing microsites that are really fun in some cases, depending on the kind of travel you're doing, where they're not conducting any voluntary collection agreement with these communities. So how do you get those taxes? Well, I like the software compliance tool, fairly affordable path to getting that taxes through the tax portals that they offer. They also offer a 24-hour complaint line. And if you're taking that 24-hour complaint line off the hands of the city and taking that burden off of your city or your county, and the complaint line can be run through a third party, great. I love it. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. A couple of other items here. When you're going through and creating a short-term rental initiative, one of the things I think building off of what Chris had mentioned, not only know your sector, but engage early. So I talk about engaging those stakeholders, building a community education program, and then, of course, monitoring success. So many vacation destinations, when we've watched this discussion happen over time, they put the rules in place and just walk away. Well, the industry is constantly changing. There's new innovative, new concepts, new methods, new unintended consequences, so many other different things. We got to keep engaged and monitor how things are working. So we want to make sure to have a monitoring success, and you can do that more easily if you have an engaged group of stakeholders you can bring back into the conversation with regularity. And then finally, understanding that changing industry. What's new? Signs of success? Well, if you're holding that ongoing stakeholder dialogue, you're tracking those evolving industry models, you're looking at these best practices. I'm a big fan of virtual site visits. When we consult with different DMOs and cities and counties, we often will take them on a virtual tour. So we'll do web conversations with different communities and ask them, what are they doing? What works and what doesn't? And we find great answers that sometimes have changed the direction our city and county we're going. I really love the third-party support, being a professional person who can help you, guide you through these conversations, because it can be difficult. And then, of course, that community and industry communication as well. It's got to be constant. All right, let's move on to the next slide. The playbook, this is how I see it. You have a problem, and there is a solution. Let's go through this with stakeholder identification and engage that professional guide to help you. Now, a lot of times, if you're having trouble understanding is there an impact on housing or what's the economic impact of this activity, let's find some professionals who can truly help us answer those questions. Creating that working group, developing the policy analysis, what works and what doesn't, reviewing the data over time to make sure that your program is working, the creation of a toolkit. What are the different tools on our quiver? Well, there's a lot of them. And one of the ones I like is that 24-hour complaint line through the software compliance tool. But also there's other great tools that you can use, noise monitoring systems, different registration programs, different education programs that can help people be compliant. It's got to be the goal. Rolling out any new initiatives and doing that with success, and then auditing over time. How are we doing? What's changing? Let's look at the next slide. Here that is in a nutshell. The way I look at it, you're slowly moving down the field. Take it piece by piece. So many of the people who are probably on this call, and so many people have probably seen other cities have this discussion, have seen the discussions get unwieldy very quickly. Well, one of the things that you could do is take that conversation in small pieces. If you want to, slowly move down like you're moving down this field until you're auditing success. You can get there and you can find success with short-term rentals. It is a constantly evolving and changing industry. The unintended consequences are great, and I'm going to wrap up on one thing that the United States Conference of Mayors said so eloquently in 2013. If the regulation is created poorly, if the concept of creating a program is done inappropriately, what happens 100% of the time is it drives the activity underground. Thus, people are avoiding paying that necessary and obligated taxes in your community, and they aren't following the rules. But if you can create good rules, good regulations, and have a good program, you'll have a tremendous amount of success. There's not a lot of great examples out there, but there's a few, and Galveston's one of them. I like them a lot. With that, I'll wrap it up and throw it back to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, and please feel free to reach out to Matt and the team at Smart City Policy Group. So Matt, you talked about the software compliance tools. So it'd be great if we could share some examples of a few of the ones you like, but do you want to just share a couple of examples? Because a lot of people may not be familiar with them.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a couple of neat examples because it will blow some folks' minds. The couple different companies that have engaged with these: Fort Worth, Galveston, La Quinta, and Glenn County, Georgia. But let's talk real quick about Glenn County and why these are necessary. When Glenn County was going through, great people in Glenn County, got a great DMO lead in Scott McQuaid. When they were going through the discussion, anecdotal evidence would lead you to believe, and led all the county commissioners to believe, they were going to be getting hundreds of complaint calls a month. After going through and engaging with a software compliance tool, they were able to find they only received on average 8 complaint calls a month. They audited to make sure that those numbers were right, and they were. So the software compliance tool really helped. It also helped get people registered and paying those taxes. And it gave the town the opportunity, or the county opportunity, to go back and look back at their success. In Galveston, man, they are up registrations, an unbelievable amount. they've increased their tax payment, their tax remittance in that community from a small percentage to, I think it's in the neighborhood of 54% of their total hotel occupancy tax that they're taking in Galveston is through short-term rentals and coming in through their software compliance tool. It's a company called Deckard. Big fan of Deckard. I think they're frankly, I'm going to be funny about this, but they're data nerds. They're solely focused on providing a great product, and it works well. Another company that folks have talked about in the past that have served some different communities is Avenue. But there's a few different ones out there. There's a couple of really large ones, but different ones might work better for different communities. I like looking at the ones that have been successful, been tried and true, and helping those to help you in your community.
Thank you so much, Matt. And as I mentioned, we'll be sharing some of those software compliance tools, plus some suggestions on other research and data options out as one of the resources from today. And let me invite in Lucy, because we've heard that sort of big picture, but let's zoom back down into the destination organization level. And Lucy, it'd be great to hear about what's happening in Breckenridge, and particularly where the Breckenridge Tourism Office is involved in adding value. So over to you.
Thank you, Chris. And that was great information, Matt. I think some of this will show how some of these things work in action. Just a quick background on Breckenridge for those of you that are not familiar. Breckenridge is a mountain resort community primarily known for ski. We're one of the highest volume ski destinations in the world and have been for quite a long time. So high quality, high volume. We have been built on short-term rentals. We have been a condominium rental community since the 60s when skiing started, and VRBO actually had its start in Breckenridge in the 2000s. So if we go to the next slide, please. So a little bit of our history, and for the DMOs that are on the session, you're probably somewhere on a timeline like this, but in keeping with the recommendations from the Time for Democracy about start early, engage early, we started in 2017 with a resident sentiment survey, and that was largely to get in front of the noise raising around over tourism. We wanted to be sure, we know we're crowded, we know we're busy, we do busy very well. We wanted to make sure our residents we understood what our residents thought too busy was, what's too crowded. So we did that first resident survey in 2017. It was actually quite more favorable than we thought it might be. In 2018, the town asked us to direct a destination management plan. We worked with the Next Factor, who's now part of MMGY, on that. We took a year to do it, and it really is a vision plan for what does this community want to look like in 10 years. We continued with the resident sentiment surveys. We do them every other year. They've been consistent throughout, which is really interesting. During the pandemic, 2021, and again, I have to call out Erin and her team for the fabulous information that we used a lot during that period and shared with our community. We really became boots on the ground with our town management and making sure the community knew what was going on, the latest data relative to COVID, mask zones, all that kind of stuff. We took a very different role there during the pandemic. Came out of that with another resident survey, which again was surprisingly consistent with the prior ones. 21, the small mountain communities were really heavily impacted with tourism. A lot of people fled to the mountains because we were a nice, safe place. So we were at capacity, over capacity, but still our community held pretty strong on being supportive of tourism, but we didn't need that much all the time. In 22, we launched our Be Like Breckenridge program, which I'll touch on a bit here. That's our destination stewardship consumer-facing program. And we have a resident survey going out this, actually it's out right now, focusing on quality of life. Next slide, please. And this one, these were the different topics across the top that we use in our resident sentiment surveys. But in terms of segmentation, which is something that we talk about in Time for Democracy, we segmented by our community, by these sectors, so we could see where the hot pockets of support or concerns were. Next slide, please. The most important thing that came out of our destination management plan is this vision statement, this harmony, quality of life for residents and quality of place for visitors. Obviously, short-term rentals factor huge on both sides of that equation. This has been borrowed by destinations all over. We love to share. This particular vision statement is real. We live it. It is quoted consistently with our town leadership, community leadership all the time. Next slide, please. I was heartened to see Erin's information on the support for tourism, ever-growing support for tourism, and the fact that people know they have a DMO. We're very fortunate here in Breckenridge. We're about 80% support for tourism. And again, this has remained constant since 2017. And fingers crossed that we are at least as good or better when the survey comes back for 23. Next slide, please. Be like Breckenridge. So this is our responsible tourism or stewardship campaign. This is where it's marketing messaging to our guests and locals alike. And it's just tips for how people can operate in Breckenridge. I hate to say how to behave. It infers that they're not behaved, but it's tips like, don't pet the moose. It's tips like, pack water, pack sunscreen. Being environmentally sensitive on the trail, not going off trail. It's all the how-tos when you're in the destination, so you can be more like a local. We want you to feel like a local for that time when you're here in Breckenridge. So that was the impetus for this program. We launched right at the end of the pandemic, and we have expanded it now beyond just the marketing campaign or messaging, pre-arrival messaging. And now we're doing partnerships with our local business community and inviting them to find a way to meaningfully, authentically be like Breckenridge, be part of their operation. So we've got properties that are doing videos and sending that out to their clientele. We have outdoor signage that will be put up in one of the base areas that's going to be paid for by property there. All sorts of ideas for it to be integrated into the DNA for how Breckenridge operates. So it moves it beyond just a marketing campaign. Next slide, please. So during the pandemic, as I said, we had such an influx of visitors and an influx of buyers, real estate buyers, and prices escalated in most of these mountain communities just phenomenally. So it really, really put more pressure on housing than we always have pressure on housing, and it really exacerbated the problem. So town took a look at short-term rentals. We have about 4,400 rental units in Breckenridge. And what we ended up doing we had a lot of concern, quality of life in the neighborhoods, and there's more of it. And what are we going to do about short-term rentals? The town put together a task force made up of lodgers, of residents, some town staff. And this task force was brilliant. They came up with these zones, these tourism zones. And the yellow is resort. There's basically everything can be rented there. That's what it was built for rentals. It's a slope side base area lodging. The green areas is a tourism district, so still very high density, high short-term rentals. The pink that you see there is our downtown core, our historic district, and the blue, which is the majority, is our residential districts. Next slide, please. I just lifted this directly from the town site so you could see what our short-term rental owners or licensees would see. By each of those zones, they're handled differently. So in the resort zone, it's kind of wide open. Everything there can be rented. Zone 1 is still very liberal. Most of the short-term rental licenses allowed are in Zone 1 and the resort area. When we get into Zone 2, the downtown core, It's a lot less, and we're pretty close in terms of the licenses. These are caps. Licenses that we currently have out there, for example, it's 139. We allow 130, so we're only over by 9. The big gap is zone 3, that big blue district from the slide before, the residential district. We currently have over 1,100 licenses, and the zone calls for 390. Now, this was put in place in 22, and these caps are going to be taken care of by attrition. Nobody is losing a license. You can keep a license if you have it. However, if you sell a unit, the license does not transfer. And we also know that some owners will let them expire. So we expect that this totals to about 2,200 allowable licenses. We have a little over 2,500 right now. So we will over time reduce the number of short-term rental licenses by about 15%. And the majority of that is going to be in this larger residential area. The last slide, please. Chris had asked for me to just put up here our sales tax. And we're at a little over 12% sales tax. What's probably most interest for this conversation is the accommodations tax at 3.4%. That was voted in by our lodging community about 10 years ago. 1.4% of that is dedicated to destination marketing. It goes into a marketing fund, and we apply for our funds from that fund. The balance of that 2% goes into an excise tax that goes into general fund for the town. A quarter of that had been allocated towards marketing. It went into the marketing fund. That has since been redirected to childcare. Didn't impact our budget, but it puts more money towards childcare. Let's see, then the town sales tax, there's a 0.08% of that also goes into the marketing budget. One thing back to the short-term rentals, with those licenses, we did increase the, there's a normal business license you have to have for $200. And then we added, when these caps were put in place and the zones were put in place, we added regulation, like it's $756 per bedroom, and all of that money then goes into the housing fund. So yeah, it's a little easier way to look at our tax breakdown. So to wrap it up, Chris had asked me to talk a little bit about how DMOs can get involved, and I would say that whatever, kind of depends on your structure as a DMO, whether you're a membership-based chamber sort of thing, or you're a department of a town, or like we're a 501c6. A lot of DMOs are, we are primarily funded by the town. So, and we do not take political positions as a DMO, but we certainly work hard on these kind of issues. We provide data to get the emotion out of some of the conversation. Like to your point, Matt, there's a lot of consternation about impacts. The data takes the emotion out of that. We work behind the scenes to make sure that all the parties involved, residents, council members, lodgers, everybody has appropriate data, and then we make good decisions from that. Or help them make good decisions from that. So I think, for the membership-based DMOs, I think you have maybe a little broader lane. You can lean into these STR conversations, to the extent and in the way that your board and your members want you to. For the DMOs that are more like Breckenridge, the C6s, and certainly the town departments, we're a little more, we have to be a little bit more judicious in how we participate. I think we can be very active, but it has to be a little bit more behind the scenes. So I would offer that. And
thank you so much. Thank you, Lucy. And thank you, Matt. We've run a few minutes over the top of the hour, but a lot of incredibly valuable research and data. I just did want to call out, we're going to be updating our climate change action white paper series. COP28 is the big climate change UN conference. It's going to be in December. So If anybody's got any examples or updates to share, please reach out to me and we can include them. This has got dozens of examples about what destinations are taking action on regards to climate change all around the world. So it's a part of our pro bono commitment to stewardship. And with that, just to call out, our next State of the American Traveller is going to be in the new year, and you can tap into the upcoming quarterly editions at that web address right there and register. We'll be publishing all the 2024 dates in January or perhaps even pre-Christmas. So thank you again. We appreciate your attendance and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Lucy. And thank you to Aaron and the team at Future Partners. Goodbye.